Imagine that you live in the later part of the 1st century AD. You heard a preacher who came through your village, and you decided to become a Christian. You join this new fledgling religion. You're in this little local band of believers, and in your group, the only document that you have, the only reference material that you have concerning Jesus Christ and his gospel are kata markon, the gospel according to Mark. That's all you've got. So Mark, a young protege of Peter, records the Jesus story for posterity as an evangelical document, an evangelistic document, and that's what your group has. Your understanding of your nascent Christianity is based on the preaching of the traveling evangelist that converted you and your possession as a group of this one document, the gospel according to Mark. So near the end of Mark's gospel, there's a Great Commission, kind of like the Great Commission from Matthew, but it's much shorter. And Jesus says near the end of Mark, go out into all the world and preach to the whole of creation. Preach the gospel, specifically, he says, preach the gospel to the whole of creation. And then he says this, the one who believes and is baptized shall be saved, but the one who does not believe shall be condemned. That's Mark 16:16, and that's my translation. So he tells his followers, he tells the apostles, go out into the world and preach to the whole of creation, preach to them the gospel. And now subsequent to that preaching, there's people who are saved and there are people who are condemned. Now let's take a look at the differentiator in Mark 16:16 in Koine. So here we find hopistiusas kai baptistes sothesetai. So this is the first clause in verse 16, and ho is the, pistiusas is an aorist participle, believe, so ho pistiusas, the one who believes, kai is and, baptistes is baptized, it's a passive aorist participle, is baptized, sothesetai, shall be saved, it's a future passive verb, shall be saved. So the one who believes and is baptized shall be saved. So as mentioned, pistiusas and baptistes are both aorist participles. What's a participle? A participle is a verbal noun, and we use those as substantives in place of a person's name to describe them. What kind of person is he? In this case, one who believes, one who is baptized. So it stands in, pardon the nose scratch, it stands in for a person. So it's not Fred or John or Sue or Sally. It's one who believes and is baptized. So aorist participles can show action in one of two ways. It's either inceptive action, the beginning of a new action, or it's describing something that happens at a point in time. So whereas present participles describe an ongoing continual action. So in response to the preaching of the gospel that Jesus commissioned, he says, the one who believes and is baptized. Well, the one who believes sounds inceptive, doesn't it? It sounds like it's the inception of new faith, the beginning of new faith. You heard the gospel and decided to start believing. But being baptized isn't something that you start doing. It's usually an event in time, right? You don't start being baptized and continue being baptized for the rest of your life. We're not talking about the effect of baptism. We're talking about the experience of baptism. So it's pretty interesting. Go preach the gospel to all of creation, and the one who believes, anyone who believes and is baptized shall be saved. Very declarative sentence, clause, shall be saved. Not a lot of wiggle room in there. Now, let's talk about a thing called Sharp's rule. It's named after a guy from forever ago, Granville Sharp. You can Google Granville Sharp's rule, and it'll be instructive. And what Granville Sharp did was he looked at a particular construction in Greek, every single example of it, and this is the construction. Let's look back at that first clause again. When there's an article, ho, the, and a substantive, pistiusas, followed by kai, which is and another substantive, baptistes in this case, and the second substantive doesn't have an article. So the first one has the article, ho pistiusas, kai, baptistes. When the first one has the article, then there's the kai, the and the second one doesn't have the article. It always, without exception, refers to the same person. And Granville Sharp figured that out by looking at every single construction like that in the New Testament. Now, people keep thinking they find exemptions to the rule, exceptions to the rule, but every time it turns out that they make the same mistake. The rule does not apply when one of the substantives is a proper name. So it has to be a substantive. It has to be something being used in place of a person's name. So Granville Sharp's rule, interesting, significant for many, many passages in the New Testament. Significant here because it guarantees to us that the one who believes and the one who is baptized is the same one. Okay? So let's carry on. If the sentence ended right here, if that's all we had, the one who believes and is baptized shall be saved, our fledgling group of Christians that only has Mark's gospel to fall back on and the little bit of preaching they heard from the traveling evangelist, maybe one of the apostles himself even, we could conclude that salvation, the one shall be saved, is tied equally to both coming to faith and being baptized. It's like the gospel that we heard, faith in the gospel of Christ and baptism are the requirements to be saved. Let's look at the second clause in verse 16 in Koine. Hode apistesas katakrithesetai. Hode, now the post particle de is but it always comes second in a clause. So that's why it's between the and doesn't believe. So hode apistesas, the one who does not believe, katakrithesetai. Now katakrithesetai is another compound verb. Krithesetai means shall be judged, but kata means down. So katakrithesetai, shall be judged down, shall be condemned. Okay? The one who doesn't believe shall be condemned. So it's the same construction. Take the day out because it's a post. It always goes after the first word. We have the article ha. We have the aorist participle apistesas. So the alpha privative before it negates it. The one who doesn't believe. And then the future passive verb like we had in the first. Shall be saved versus shall be condemned. But notice, being baptized is just omitted here. It doesn't occur in the second clause. So Jesus says, go preach the gospel to all creation, and those who come to faith, those who begin to believe, and it's the kind of faith that is likely to prompt baptism, that'll result in salvation. They shall be saved. But it's the faith response to the gospel that makes the difference, not the baptism. Because otherwise, he would tell us, and the ones who do not come to faith and who do not get baptized shall be condemned. But he leaves the baptism out of the second one. Think about it this way for a moment. A faith response to the gospel makes a difference. But if you have no faith response to the gospel but decide to get baptized anyway because there's a bunch of people in your community who are getting baptized, how could that have any sort of a salvific effect? How could that be soteriologically significant? How could you be saved by what amounts to a public bath that you're going along with your friends and neighbors when you had no sort of faith transaction, no inception of a belief in the gospel that was preached. Pretty cool passage. It's neat to see the interplay between the sort of parallel constructions and how Granville Sharp's rule tells us that the inceptive faith that's followed by this baptism results in salvation, but baptism apart from inceptive faith is meaningless, and therefore those who don't come to that inceptive faith, that beginning of belief in the gospel, shall not be saved, but face that katakrathesetai, that thumbs down condemnation. The verse also opens up a lot of other questions, like what about baptism for people? What about people who didn't get to hear the gospel? What about infants? What about those who are somehow mentally incapacitated and can't make a good decision? Those are all great questions, and answers exist for those questions. But in our thought experiment today, where our little group only has the Gospel of Mark and where we're only looking at verse 15 and 16 today, those answers aren't present. But the good news is, in Koine Corner, we're going to keep looking at different passages over the course of time, and surely we will bump into those questions and their answers down the road. If this has been good for you, of course, as always, I ask that you please hit the subscribe button, like, share, let your friends know. The best thing you can do for any YouTube type person is subscribe to their channel. That's how YouTube knows that people care about the content, and that's what makes YouTube more likely to promote the content. Thank you as always, and until we see each other again, Charis Kai Reina Humin, grace and peace to you.